wear pink for breast cancer. We will wear red in February and any other time of the year for heart disease, right? We will definitely promote even conditions like Alzheimer's and dementia. They wear the color purple. So we see the spirit of galvanizing amongst these other conditions really, really strong, okay? But when it comes to mental health, nobody wants to talk about it. Nobody wants to discuss it. And let me bring it home for you. So you ever been in church and there's been like an altar call and pastor says, hey, just we're going to come and we're going to have an altar call and just bring all your cares unto the Lord, blah, blah, blah. And they might say, just say it out. And you might have a person that says, yeah, I'm praying for my brother who got diagnosed with hypertension. He had a stroke last week. You may have another sister who says, pray for my sister. She's struggling with breast cancer. So we hear all of these things. If there's a person who is at the altar at the same time and they say, pray for me because I'm struggling with my mental health. I almost killed myself last night, but I made it through. We ain't ready for that one. We're not quite ready for that language. Not in the church and not even outside the church. Because that's the reality and people don't want to talk about that. Because that then stigmatizes. Because what happens is, as much as we're focusing in on God and we're at the altar for prayer, somebody is going to turn around to see who that is. And what if it was the pastor? So if the pastor gets up and says, y'all pray for me, I went to the doctor this week, they're doing some testing. They say I may have, lymphoma, I might have something, we all in. Pastor, we praying for you, we all in. And we not even checking his ability to preach and be a pastor. We're feeling sorry for him because he, could have this diagnosis. But if pastor gets up and says, y'all, I'm going to bring a word, but I'm just grateful to be here. And I want to tell my own testimony. Because last night I struggled because I struggled with major depressive disorder. And I just couldn't get myself together. You know what I'm saying? I didn't know that I was going to make it here today. But we're going to get through this word because God sent me here and I'm walking with him. If pastor said that, we would be like, okay, we praying for you, pastor. But somebody would be distracted because that's not what we're used to hearing. The reality of mental health is not where it needs to be. Now, just like I said to somebody a few minutes ago, mental health, I like to talk about mental health and particularly in the church because I feel like, it's a safe place to talk about mental health. But in my Bible, mental health is all up in the book, right? Because we don't know if Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John had cancer, diabetes, heart disease, or any of those conditions, but there was a man named Legion in the book of Mark. Let me tell you where it is. Real quick. Look, and I don't want to be like they did in the old days. Y'all remember the old church where I don't think it was Baptist, but it was another denomination, and they would have a person over on the side that would be the reader, and they'd be like, read. Oh my goodness. And read. Okay, so in Mark, the first chapter of Mark, starting at, let's see, I want to say verse 21. All right, let's see what it says. Uh-oh, that's my Bible acting funny. Here we go. All right. Jesus and his companions went to the town of Capernaum. When the Sabbath day came, he went into the synagogue, so that's kind of where we at. And he went into church, right? And began to teach. The people were amazed at his teaching, for he taught with real authority. That means Jesus was preaching that day. He was on fire. He was lit. That's what the young people say. Y'all heard that before, right? He was lit. Okay, I'm sorry, wrong group. Okay. The people were amazed with his teaching, for he taught with real authority, quite unlike the teachers of religious law. Suddenly, a man in the synagogue, a man in the church, who was possessed by an evil spirit cried out. Now, y'all know that, I ain't gonna say every church, but every family, every workplace, every place you go, there's a person who might be a little different, right? And we may recognize their differences, right? And so a lot of times what we tend to do as it relates to mental health, and mental health has many divisions, okay? So we're talking about mental health, and I'm speaking in the realm of serious mental illness. So we're talking about major depression, we're talking about bipolar disorder, we're talking about schizophrenia. There are other arms and legs that are associated to mental health, like dementia. There are developmental disability. Developmental disability is an umbrella term. And under developmental disability, you find conditions like autism, Fragile X syndrome, Down syndrome, cerebral palsy, so different conditions like that. So mental health is kind of broad and not just your depressive and serious mental illness conditions, right? So as it says here, a man who, in the synagogue, who was possessed by an evil spirit cried out, "Why are you interfering us, Jesus of Nazareth?" So that's Jesus up here preaching that new light, and we got Brother Joe in the back, and he stands up and said, "Jesus, what is you talking about?" Now, all of us would turn around and be like, "Joe, sit down. No, not right now. This ain't the time." You know what I'm saying? Because that's how we do cousin at the family reunion. We just get them a plate and sit them down in the corner and tell them, you just sit over here, right? Because we want them to get out of the way, right? "Have you come to destroy us? I know who you are, the Holy One of God." But Jesus reprimanded him, "Be quiet, come out of the man." So he didn't speak to the man, he spoke to the spirit in him, okay? He ordered. At that, the evil spirit screamed, threw the man into a convulsion, and then came out of him, okay? So, in real terms, that might have looked like, the man overcame his evil spirit and got filled with the Spirit of God and, convulsed, and then he was a new person right after that because Jesus spoke to his condition. What we do is we ignore the condition. We walk past the condition. And a lot of times we walk past it because a lot of times we don't address it in ourselves. We know who we are. We know where we struggle. We know we have moments where we are not at our best, and we may not know why. But when it comes to mental health, sometimes we are not in a preventive position, nor are we in a position to be actually addressing the things that we know and we see that are happening in and around us and how we relate to the world, okay? So I just wanted to make a point about how important mental health is, because that is something that gets lost a lot. And while we're talking, Pam passed out some note cards. If you have a question or anything that you'd like for me to address, then please write it down, or you can ask me directly. But sometimes people don't want to talk about certain things, so I just always pass out cards, and we can kind of talk collectively in that way. One of the most important things I want you to understand about mental health is mental health flows into two directions. You have people who are diagnosed, and you have people who are not diagnosed but experience similar symptoms. So your diagnosis track would be that SMI, serious mental illness, that I was speaking to you about. So conditions like major depressive disorder, bipolar disorder. And so we throw that term bipolar out a lot. We say, "Oh, child, don't pay her no attention. She bipolar." We done said it at work or at home or wherever, grocery store or wherever. And so when you say that, it could be true, but there are so many versions of bipolar disorder that it's not just as plain as saying that a person has bipolar. It is that that person definitely would need to be tested and go through a round of testing so that it can be determined what type of bipolar disorder they have, if they have that at all. Schizophrenia is another major serious mental illness condition that is a diagnosed condition. And that has multiple layers. When people who work in the world of mental health, therapists, psychiatrists, psychologists, we deal with a manual that's called the DSM-5, and that's the Universal Diagnostic Manual that has all the diagnoses in it for mental health. And so in that manual, you have to make sure that you have evaluated the person so you know exactly what they are. And it's like the evaluator would have to really make sure that their diagnosis is definitive. So the question may be, if the person is being evaluated for bipolar disorder, and bipolar disorder is kind of if I stretch my arm, and if I had this arm stretched that way too, but I got to hold this microphone real quick. If we did like this, okay. So on this end is a real manic condition and symptoms. On this end is depressive symptoms, okay? So a person with bipolar disorder, they are trying to regulate themselves so they stay in the middle. So we all have depressive symptoms, and we all have times where we're like, YOLO, or, I just want to do what I want to do. But we have limitations to it. A person who is experiencing manic symptoms, they tend not to adhere to laws or social norms or whatever. So that's why you might have had that scenario of Jesus preaching and Joe in the back standing up and having a comment during the sermon. And we don't do that. Like, you might have a question, but you don't stand up and, especially with Jesus up here, Lord, if Jesus was preaching in New Light, y'all, that ain't the time, Joe, right? But if anybody preaching in New Light, it's still not the time because it's not appropriate. If you have a question about discernment, you can ask the pastor afterwards. You can go to Bible study. There are ways that you can engage that question, and we know that, right? And even if you might not believe totally in what the pastor said, you can schedule a meeting and sit down and talk to him. And he would be, wanting to engage those questions because he wants us to learn, right? A person who is manic is going to act out, not care about what the culture in the church is, not care about laws or anything like that. They are acting out. They're acting on the overwhelming nature of their emotions. And it could be a variety of different things. And so on this end, the person is very depressed. They are depressed almost to a point where they're not eating, they are withdrawn, they are not engaged in regular activities, very irritable, not easily engaging to anybody. And they're isolating themselves, okay? So with bipolar disorder, we want to make sure we can help this person to treat their symptoms, take their medication, go to therapy, do different types of, management type strategies so that they can stay in the middle. And when everything is working well for them, they are in the middle, okay? And not too depressed or too manic, okay? That's how that disorder operates. You also have schizoaffective disorder that kind of affects the mood, and you might be engaging with a person who presents themselves as though they might be three people in one, okay? So it just depends, but again, in the diagnostic realm, there are multiple versions of schizoaffective disorder, okay? So we deal with a lot of serious mental illnesses, on the diagnostic track of mental health, right? So you could have a person who is diagnosed with major depressive disorder, meaning that they consistently display depressive symptoms, and it's not even triggering. It's not like somebody died in the family and they're feeling sad, right? They just, over a course of time, they continue to have these same symptoms, and it's not really triggering necessarily, okay? The same way on the non-diagnostic side. So if a person is not diagnosed with a mental illness, I might, if my mother suddenly passes tomorrow, I know she in heaven with my dad. I can rest on what I know about God and his care for me in a time of bereavement. But I'm going to shed some tears. I'm going to be sad. I may withdraw from my normal activity. So I might exhibit some behaviors that look similar to somebody with major depressive disorder. But over time, I'm going to get over it. Over time, I'm going to be able to reconcile my feelings, and I don't have to have a diagnosis to go to therapy. So if I'm really taking good care of myself, I'm probably in therapy anyway. because we all have issues, problems, and we got a new presidential administration, so we all should be in therapy. Hello? I'm just saying. Bible study, prayer meeting, or something. We need to be doing a little extra, okay, these days. And so with that understanding, there are some times when, these conditions mirror diagnosed and non-diagnosed symptoms. Sometimes. But I think traditionally in our culture as African Americans, we have taken on a lot of myth and mismanagement. And when I say myth, one of the things that I try to make sure that I say out loud to people, and particularly in a church setting or religious gathering, we've heard this thing where if a person commits suicide, they're going straight to hell. If you heard that, if you've ever heard that before, okay, yeah. Yeah, as a child, I heard that, and I was, we were shook. It was like, okay, we ain't going out like that. But as I got older and life was lifing and, encountering different situations, I ran into people who had experienced feeling like they wanted to hurt themselves. As I grew in my career field, I ran into young people who were self-mutilating and cutting themselves, doing things to self-harm, and even having suicidal ideations. And so I had to challenge my thought because I remember working in child psychiatry at MCV, and I remember encountering a child who had come from a very devout family. Her father was a pastor, and she was having suicidal ideations. And she kept telling me, she was like, Miss Monica, if I didn't think I was going to hell, I'd have been gone a long time ago. And it just made me think and think and think. And not that I wanted this child to die. I wanted her to live, but I had to reconcile that with my understanding of God and, the field and, the understanding that some people just have a condition that leads to them having suicidal ideations all the time. That condition is called borderline disorder. And a borderline disorder means that a person has symptomology of multiple diagnoses. So they might be bipolar and something else. They may have some other multiple symptoms, and they kind of encapsulate those symptoms and their diagnoses, and they call them borderline people because they tend to have mood swings. They have like trust and mistrust issues. I remember a long time ago, I was working for a group home that serviced adults with developmental disabilities, and we had people who were dually diagnosed. So they had developmental disabilities, and they might have had a mental health diagnosis. And we had a young man who he loved being at the group home. He loved all of his housemates. And one day he walked out the door, and we were looking around for him and didn't see him. And so, a lot of the staff were there because we were there for a staff meeting, and we found ourselves looking around the neighborhood and looking everywhere for him. And there was a set of railroad tracks not too far from the house, and he was literally hiding in a bush where he could see us, but we couldn't see him. And he was hiding in the bush trying to see how many people were looking for him, because he felt like nobody cared. This is what he told us after we found him. But, I'm thinking to myself, so you mean for real you weren't really trying to run away? Like you was just hiding out, just kind of like a hide and go seek type thing, And none of that really made sense to me. But again, he was a borderline. So I say all that to say that there are symptoms that flow on both sides. Now, this is the key, though. What do we do, Monica? What do we do with all of that? Because we may know some people who have symptomology, and it could be diagnostic, and it could be that some people you're just like me, and we have some good days and bad days. What do we do with that stuff? Well, just like anything, mental health is treatment. There is no cure, okay? There is no cure for a mental health disorder. It's treatment. There's no cure for diabetes either. And so if you have diabetes, type 1 or type 2, you need to be on your treatment regimen. And that may mean that you go to either your PCP or endocrinologist. That means that you test your blood sugars. That means that you eat a certain diet. You try to stay away from sugar. You do a variety of different things. You exercise. You do things to treat that condition. Well, mental health is the same way. If you have a mental health diagnosis, you should be seeing a psychiatrist. A psychiatrist is the term for the professional who prescribes medication for people who have a mental health diagnosis. The psychologist is a person who does testing. So if your children are having some cognitive or skills are not, on scale with their age and grade, they may recommend that, there's a testing that's done. And it may be academic testing. It may be something that goes into determining what their intelligence level is, and that will be done by a psychologist. A therapist is either a LCSW, which is a licensed clinical social worker, or a licensed professional counselor, which is a LPC, okay? Those two titles are the people who do therapy. There's a therapy agency downstairs, and they're really good. I know some of the people that work there, so, definitely, tap into them and make sure that you all get their information, and they provide a variety of different services under therapy. But therapy is important because we need to be able to have someone that we can freely talk to and relate to about what's going on. And those things, along with other things, just being involved with people, not letting your diagnosis stifle you and make you feel like you are different, talking about it. A lot of people don't want to talk about their mental health condition. They don't want to tell people that they go to a therapist. They don't want to tell people that they take psychotropic medications. One of my girlfriends said to me this week, she said, girl, ever since I started at Cymbalta, my mood has been great. Like, I feel like, my life is changed, and I should have started it much earlier, So I like to hear things like that, because that means that a person stepped out of their shell and tried to engage not just the physical elements of their health, but the mental health and emotional parts of their health. Same way, if you don't have a mental health diagnosis, right? You still get stressed out, you get frustrated, you have moments that you feel sad. And if it becomes pervasive where you feel like it is infringing on your ability to thrive at work or at school or wherever you are, then you should go and talk to someone about it. You should be in therapy, because therapy helps a person just to have a way that you can just channel your thoughts, emotions. And even if you're not sure about it, just try it. Just try it and see how you like it. If you don't like it, then that maybe that method is not for you. But you should be engaged in something that's going to help you keep a good balance between the way you think and the way that your emotions flow. If you find yourself being irritable, really quickly, and people are like, gosh, man, I just asked the question, what's going on? That type of thing. Then you really should pay attention to that, because that's really not how it should be. There are other things you can do on your own. You can carve out time for yourself. I've had moms who say to me, oh my God, I feel so overwhelmed. As soon as I get in the house, the kids are, Mom, Mom, Mom. They at me. And I just need a few minutes to myself, just where I can just, be to myself. And then, okay, I'm going to see what everybody wants. So I said to her, so take that time. Set a boundary. That's something else we don't do good with. We don't set good boundaries. So I said to her, okay, so what happens is that when you pull up in the driveway, you tell the kids, okay, we having an MT soon as we walk in the house. And they might say, what is MT? Mommy's time is what MT is. Mommy's time. So mommy has an MT for 15 minutes when we get inside. And what that means is that I need everybody to take their book bag off their back, put it down by the door. I need you, this is a household. Her household was one where you got to take your shoes off at the door, and everybody engage in an MT with mommy. And that means that I want everybody to have 15 minutes of quiet time while mommy is having mommy time. So everybody's going to decompress because y'all been in school all day, and we're going to take 15 minutes of quality self-care time to just have mommy time, and I'm calling it mommy time because mommy needs you all to support what she is trying to do. So I need you to go in your room, and during this time, you cannot, come to the door unless there's an emergency. What is an emergency? Is anybody on fire? Is anything burning? Is anybody, about to vomit or something really bad happening? Is somebody coming in the door that shouldn't be coming in the door? So, I told her, I said, list out what can be interrupting MT time so that they are sure. And then, they know exactly what they need to do and start to execute. Now, of course, she, in the feedback she gave me, there were a couple times early on where they, had some questions and they thought it was an emergency, but it was not. And I said to her, if you know that it's not an emergency, then you have to keep your boundary solid, because they've got to figure it out until you come out of MT time. Because if you set a precedence and you then start to violate what you said, then it holds no weight. And they will continue to engage, because we're humans and we manipulate. That's what we do. So she kept, she started it and they continued it, and it worked out really, really well. So take that liberty, as women. I saw a guy in here, but as women, we are superheroes, whether the world knows it or not. We're superheroes, and we try to take on so much, but we're human beings too. So we've got to set a precedence for ourselves. We got to take care of ourselves so that then we can get engaged in taking care of other people, okay? One other thing I want to just go back to what I was saying about suicide. One of the revelations that I came to with suicide was that I said, so I get it that to engage in self-mutilation and self-harm to a point of death could mean that this person is trying to supersede God. And that was the logic that I came up with as to why people said that if you commit suicide, that you are going to hell, right? But then I said to myself, our gracious, compassionate, and all-loving God does not stop being God because a person feels like they need a sense of relief from their existence. God is still God at all times. God is still loving. And he even said that there's nothing that will separate us from his love. So that throws that myth that's not in the biblical scripture, it throws it out the window. I had just 2 weeks ago, with Serenity Counseling, we do a wealth of crisis services in the city. We have 19 crisis beds. And what that means is that we have 3 locations where we will house people either as a preventive measure of them going to a hospital and having to receive services at a hospital, or if they've been at a hospital and they need to slowly integrate back into the community, they can step down to us. And it's not a group home, but it's a temporary stay, and temporary meaning as minimal as 5 days up to 15 days. There are sometimes when people come into our crisis programs and they basically come with the shirt on their back. They don't have any ID. They don't have a birth certificate. They don't have a cell phone. They only have the clothes on their back. We get people who are stepping down from incarceration also, who come to our program, who have a mental health diagnosis and need treatment versus being incarcerated. We have, so we basically, and there's some people who come from their homes and their families who need crisis support. They may need a retreat from their normal everyday life for a few days. They need to come stay with us for a few days, maybe get adjustments to their medication or whatever, and we will do that for them. One of the biggest problems that we encounter is that a good 90% of the people that we service are homeless. And therefore, what happens is that we try to stabilize them, make them, jumpstart them back to life and make sure they've gotten their medication, seen a therapist, all kinds of things to stimulate their mental health in the right direction. But what happens is that we are constantly fighting against the fact that when we do that and the person is feeling good, if they're homeless, they would go right back to the street and the crisis would start all over again. We recently, last year, started a housing program. That program is called the Leaf Project program. We have 2 houses on Lee Street, right across from the historic Maggie Walker Museum. And so there we house people who can afford a minimal income for their living situation. So I just say that to say that that's kind of the realm of service that we do at Serenity Counseling. And, it's been going really well. And so I'm always excited about opportunities like this where I can come out and talk to people about mental health and share what's going on in the community, in the world of mental health. But please take your mental health very seriously. Engage in something that is going to help you before something tragic happens, something major happens. We haven't had like a major storm that came through here and wiped people's houses out through fire or water or anything like that. We've been fortunate in that, right? But can you imagine if a month from now we had like a hurricane, a tornado, or something that came through, and the house that you worked so hard to build and the structure of this church, if it was all just wood and dirt and dust, we would be traumatized. And so I'm saying to you now, life is going to happen. So get ahead of it. Connect with a therapist so you can start talking about some things. And I'm not even talking about an age range. I'm talking about just human beings. If you in your 80s or 90s, I recommend that you go see a therapist. If you see your children struggling with being able to reconcile their emotions, and they don't want to talk about it to you, then you might ask them, would you like to talk about it to someone? So it's kind of like when we go to the doctor and the doctor checks your heart and your lungs. Would you like to go to somebody who can just have you to sit and talk and maybe do play therapy or something like that? And if they agree to it, let them go, because that might be something that's going to help them in the long run. Okay? I love y'all, man, because I love God, and God says you can't love me if you don't love people. And so I just thank y'all for your time and your attention. I hope you learned something that you didn't learn before. And I just want to applaud the children, because you guys have done an excellent job. Can I get a high five? You have done excellent. I mean, you all have been well behaved and just in here listening to a lot of stuff that may not make sense. But I hope you got a little nugget out of it. And if nothing else, we love God because God loves us. All right. Yes, ma'am.
I have a relative who has a dual diagnosis, and I spoke with them yesterday, and they had themselves in a situation that could have been detrimental. And I got a little frustrated with them because me on the outside looking in, I know that why would you put yourself in that situation? But how do I handle that as far as not being frustrated with them, but try to be patient with them because of their diagnosis?
I appreciate you saying that, because there's a lot of misperception and misunderstanding when it comes to mental health. And we want to help our loved ones and our friends when they are having an episode, right? And so I want you to know that if a person is presenting themselves in a way or doing something or engaging in a behavior that puts them in danger or puts other people in danger, then that's the important part that you need to recognize, right? And pay attention to. Because that's when we get into this system where you see people who need help, and you hear this term TDO or ECO, okay? TDO means a temporary detaining order. And that means that this person needs to be hospitalized, but they may not recognize the need to be hospitalized. They may be pushing back like, girl, I'm not going to nobody's hospital. I don't care what you say. Because in order to engage the hospital setting for mental health or emotional health, you have to either willingly go. So I say, hey, I need to go and go to the hospital and get checked out because something's not right. Okay? But if that person is resistant and you're saying, hey, look, why don't you just go to the hospital because something may be going on with your medication, right? And they say, no, I'm not going. But then that person says, and the next person that come in here and say something to me about my medication, I'm going to stab them in the throat. And you're like, ugh. Now, you might know this person to be very sweet and endearing and love the Lord with all their heart, right? But they definitely said that. I had an incident in my crisis program yesterday where a young man said to one of my staff, he had just transitioned to the program the day before from the Richmond City Jail. He had a mental health diagnosis, and it was very pleasant, very pleasant. But yesterday, he all of a sudden had an episode, and he told my case manager, he said, you say one more thing, and I'm going to stab you. Okay, well, that's a threat. And then he walked off, and he walked to the back porch. We immediately called 911 because we're not waiting around for you to find something. He don't have access to knives, but we're not waiting for you to find one or try to figure out the next method. So the police came, and when the police arrived, he then said, I'm feeling suicidal and I want to go to the hospital. So the police didn't have to handcuff him. They just called the ambulance and they took him to Richmond Community. Well, had he been resistant and saying, no, and I'm a kill her and I'm gonna kill you and whatever, then they would have had put handcuffs on him. And it's a judicial process also, because they have to engage the magistrate to get paperwork that says this person needs to be TDO'd, because you're really taking a person out of their surroundings. But the goal is to keep them safe and keep the community safe and the people around them safe. And so that's what the goal is. So again, if a person is just, if they're not presenting in a way that's danger to self or danger to others, then you just, want to continue to be patient with them, like you said, and then try to engage them to go to their therapist, their psychiatrist, and, get some help at that point. But if they start to talk in ways that are just not safe about themselves or other people, you definitely want to call 911. You would call 911 and say, hey, my friend or my cousin, my family member needs some help, and this is what they're doing. Okay? And 988 is another source that we use nationally for support with mental health. Anybody else have any questions or anything I can address? Very good question. Thank you for that.
Just to let everybody know, Monica will be here for the rest of the event.
I'll be
She has to
downstairs.
run out for a little bit, but she's going to come
Yes.
back and she will be here. If you have any questions on your card, please feel free to give it to me. I promise I won't look at it. And I'll give it to Monica so she
Yep.
can.
Yep, absolutely. All right, well, thank y'all. Yay! New light on the hill. Whoop, whoop, whoop. All right. Okay.
Please go downstairs and venture, and we're going to have some physical fitness in just a moment. Let's go see if we can put our boots on the ground.
Yes.
Okay,